This is Where Did the Road Go? Our aim is to explore the fringe, to be true skeptics and question openly, to investigate the paranormal, bring light to the dark corners of history, and give a voice to the shunned of science. We deal in mystery and the important questions that these subjects bring to light. What is reality? Who are we? And why are we here? Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com for a full show archive, links to all our social media, upcoming schedule, and much, much more. Now, join your host Soraya on this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
Welcome to this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go? Tonight we continue our UFO history series. We're going to be doing part 7, and next week will be part 8. We actually recorded both of these back to back, so patrons will be getting part 8 right away. If you want to become a patron, it's only $3. Go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. You get extra stuff. You get some stuff right away in these multi-part interviews, and there's going to be quite a few coming up. I know Steph Young is going to be joining us here in a few weeks, and that's probably going to end up being multi-part. And I have some other guests that hopefully we will be confirming soon that I don't want to jinx by talking about. I also am putting the Fort Fest presentations up to patrons. Some or all of them I may make public eventually. Haven't decided yet. And finally, I fixed our iTunes problem. So anyone who was previously having problems with iTunes, hopefully that issue is fixed now. And I have a couple midweek podcasts coming up this week, one of which I spent a little time ranting about what the problem is and why iTunes drives me crazy. And as an alternative, I also just submitted us to the Google Play Store. So Google Play Music or whatever it is will be hopefully hosting Where Did the Road Go, and you'll be able to get that on Google Play in the Google Play Store. However that's going to work, it's not live as of my saying this. It might be live by the time you're hearing this, so I don't know exactly how it's going to work yet, but there will be a link on wheredidtheroadgo.com when it is up. All right, enough of that. Here's part 7 of UFO history. And I am back with Aaron Gulyas and Mike Clelland for part 7 of UFO history. We've been doing this for about a year and a half now. What was intended to be one show. And I'm glad it wasn't. And I've said this before, but I really wish we went in with the intention of doing a series, because I think we rushed through the early stuff.
Yeah, we did. We're gonna.
So maybe we'll go back.
And I don't know that much about the early stuff, so I might not be able to add much. So
yeah, I think we did kind of rush through it. Yeah, we should do the director's cut where we sort of just sort of recreate it and pretend it was all left on the cutting room floor for nefarious censorship reasons or something.
There we go. And Mike, since the last time I had you on, you were talking about your new book, which is Messengers. Is it just Messengers?
The Messengers, yes.
The Messengers. Okay, I knew that wasn't right. And I've had a number of people tell me that while they were listening to the interview, they saw owls.
And that does not surprise me in the slightest. And if you hadn't told me that, I would have been disappointed. I would have felt that because I thought that 2-part interview, I thought it went really well, and why wouldn't they just be manifested out of the ether for that, So yeah.
All right, so we're still technically in the 1990s, because there's at least one thing we forgot to cover, and someone mentioned this when they were listening back through, and that was we never got to talking about Dr. Greer.
Oh, Dr. Greer. I'm always sort of, I find that people are always surprised when they find out how long Steven Greer has been involved in this stuff. Started off with CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and he started that in 1990. So it wasn't even, he didn't really hit the big time until the mid-90s. But back in 1990, I looked up on their website, and their aim was, quote, to establish peaceful and sustainable relations with extraterrestrial life forms. So if you sort of think of Greer as the one of the founders of the exopolitics movement, that statement really does summarize that: peaceful and sustainable relations with extraterrestrial life forms. This idea that not only, we've gone far beyond even the question of whether or not intelligent life exists outside Earth. We've gone beyond the question of whether they're visiting us. We're just taking all that as sort of as read for granted, and we're jumping to, well, how do we enter into a sort of political and diplomatic and personal relationship with these life forms. And as the organization developed, he developed these sort of, I think he called them protocols, but I might be mixing that up with the remote viewing stuff, which also had protocols. But you could pay money to, and I think you still can, to go out into the wilderness with Steven Greer, and at least back in the '90s, it was, you're waving flashlights in the air, and trying to establish contact with these beings. And as the organization developed, they sort of morphed into what would become the roots of the so-called disclosure movement. And part of that movement, which they saw as being very innovative, but if you remember back to the Condon Committee, episode 4, maybe, of our series here, the idea of going before Congress, or pretending to go before Congress, or going before somebody you think is important, and explaining about the aliens and bringing witnesses. They did that in 1997. They sent statements to Congress with their evidence, and they were helped out by Edgar Mitchell, who, the Apollo astronaut, who was very heavily involved in some UFO stuff. Then in 2001, they did the whole press conference thing at the National Press Club, which listeners might remember is the place where Richard Hoagland always said he was going to do things, and then sort of like 5 people would show up, and it was because of the Freemasons that more people didn't show up, or something like that. And so, Hoagland. So they do this sort of stuff, and CSETI morphed into the I think it morphed into the disclosure. Did it? Was he the? Yeah, the Disclosure Project as an organization, I believe, but I might be mixing.
And there's also a
up.
book, The Disclosure Project.
Yeah, it gets very he was the Disclosure Project guy, and it becomes very confusing because Greer started up the Disclosure Project in '98 or '99, and then that term disclosure sort of gets co-opted by everybody in that wing of ufology. So it gets very difficult to determine who's saying what at what particular time. My favorite thing about Greer is that he consistently has claimed that he briefed CIA Director James Woolsey about all of this back in the '90s, and then when pressed, he would sort of explain, well, it was at a dinner party. Yes, you briefed him at a dinner party. No, you talked at the guy at a dinner party. Woolsey has sort of denied that he received any sort of briefing. He's probably struggling to remember, oh gosh, that crazy guy at Fred's party. Greer is he is a doctor. I mean, unlike some people in ufology, he actually is a doctor. He was an emergency room doctor, I think, in North Carolina, South Carolina, no, North Carolina, for a long time, up until he went full time with the disclosure stuff in the late '90s, and he really did kick off this idea that ignore all the questions and doubt, and things about all of your skepticism about whether or not they're here and whether or not they're intelligent. Let's focus on building this relationship between the planet Earth and the aliens. And it gets picked up on by later, sort of morphs into exopolitics. That's another word that gets thrown around a lot. Not long after the '90s, people like Michael Salla and Alfred Weber, and my favorite, and I don't think we talked about him, Richard Boylan. You guys remember Richard Boylan?
Oh, sure. Richard Boylan's still around.
Boylan.
Yeah.
Is he?
Oh, yeah.
I always expect he's dead.
No, he's still out there. He's still kicking.
Really?
Yeah.
He must be.
He's
like
the guy that invented the helmet, right? The funny helmet that would.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he's the one who I remember.
It was basically a football helmet with, like, I think, quite honestly, tinfoil on it, and you would wear that, and it would protect you from being abducted.
Oh
if you
my.
slept with a football helmet. And it's probably a little more sophisticated than that. So
Yeah, and what Boylan, what's interesting about Boylan is back in the 90s, he was one of the few voices who was saying that, if people had a negative abduction experience, it's because it wasn't a real alien abduction, because the aliens are friendly and they wouldn't treat anybody poorly.
oh, and and Greer has taken on that mantra.
Yeah, so if you had a negative if if you were probed extensively against your will, it was the military. It was a MILAB, a military abduction, and the purpose of it is to give the aliens a bad name, to promote suspicion of the aliens, and thus the cabal can keep their secrets and keep hostility toward aliens at a fever pitch. Back in 2001, when I was working on my master's thesis about contact deism, sort of epilogue was about exopolitics and the disclosure movement and people like Boylan. And I was subscribing to all of Boylan's all of his email lists and email newsletters and everything. And just around the corner, it's any moment now, the Galactic Federation, which I just the Galactic Federation, because that's what they would call it, right? Because they watch Star Trek too. Um, the Galactic Federation was on the verge of intervening in Earth affairs. If the good people of Earth, the white hats, the white knight politicians, don't do something soon to get the Bush cabal out of power, the aliens would intervene. And I had a brief email correspondence with him about his views on the contactees, and kind of predictably, he told me that I should be very careful about anybody who's skeptical about the contactees, because the contactees were all telling the truth. Because the aliens were friendly. For the contactees, the aliens were friendly. So clearly, that's the truth. It's the David Jacobs, that you have to worry about, because he's painting this negative picture of hybridization and alien takeover, and it's not like that, really. They're just like us, but better, and they're coming to get us. And the first mention I ever heard of Boylan was reading through a bunch of old saucer smear newsletters, and I was reading through the ones in like 1994, when Boylan lost his psychiatry license for his nude hot tub therapy with his patients, and was cited for several types of inappropriate relationships. He later claimed that this was a conspiracy, that the reviewers involved had links to naval intelligence or something like that. Because they all do, don't they? Nobody ever does anything wrong if they're in the alien business.
Sure.
Any misdeeds are fabricated.
Is this where the tinfoil hat thing came from?
I don't know where it's necessarily, and I should be very careful what I'm saying, because I'm trying to remember this correctly. But I know he did. There was a. I think it's actually been resurrected from the. There was a newsletter called JAR, JAR, a Journal of Abduction Research, and it was initially run by. I know that it was Elaine Douglas was the spearheaded it initially, and since she's passed on, it's been resurrected, and now it's a website. It had actually been was a PDF newsletter, so you could and he wrote a long article on the helmet he said he was getting very good benefits from, where people were who felt they were being abducted, many nights a week. And there are folks out there who tell those stories, and they don't like it, and they are terrified, and they want it to stop. And he said that this actually worked. And there's also, maybe there's some evidence, maybe it did actually work somehow. And then there's also, whatever, just, other folks that had said to have the same type of thing. I don't know if this is really going on as much now, but this was sort of an 80s and 90s thing. Just saying the name Jesus, in the name of Jesus, I command you not to abduct me, and that has also been said to have been a great effect. I am the sources of those claims. I have not. Are somewhat dubious in my opinion, but yeah. So that's. I don't really know that much about Boylan. I know a few people who've worked with him, and then they've actually. It sounds like he was doing serious. He was working with folks and at his own level, I guess.
Early on, he did a lot of the actual sort of John Mack style working with the abductees, and I think a lot of that tapered off after he after the fallout from his psychiatry stuff.
Okay.
I,
Yeah,
I
because
think he was a little more leery of taking on that professional role. But then
I
he
spoke to a
yeah.
woman. Yeah, I spoke to a woman who's and she had some experiences, and she went to a conference and eventually got hypnotized and sort of relived certain aspects of these experiences. And she's, she just sort of described it. I said, well, can I ask, like, who was the hypnotherapist? And there was this long pause on the phone, and she's like, kind of whispered, like you could tell she was like looking right and left, like, is anyone listening? And she said, it was Richard Boylan. And I was like, wow, how did that go? And she said, actually, he was very good. He was a very good hypnotherapist. So, that's obviously secondhand, but
It's interesting. One of the things he's into now, and I'm looking at his website because it's the reason I thought this is horrible. The reason I thought he was dead is because every time I go to his website, it's a plain gray background with black text and blue hyperlinks. So I just assume he's dead because it looks like a website from
oh, I
1998.
was going to say, yeah, there's some people who haven't
But
upgraded their sites, and
the thing that he's into is the fact that some people on Earth, especially children, might be starseed.
oh yeah, he's
And he's
that,
got this ridiculous list of how you can tell if your kid's a starseed, and it's they hardly ever have flus or bad colds. They have a lot of allergies, low digestive tolerance for certain substances like dairy. They're lactose intolerant or whole wheat products, and find meat eating repulsive. They develop disorders labeled as Asperger's or attention deficit hyperactivity, which are totally not the same thing at all.
right.
Which suggests a partial incompatibility between their neurological wiring and the nervous system of regular humans. So that always, I read this before, and it jumps out at me that with you have parents trying to work through situations with children who aren't neurotypical, and have been diagnosed as having something on the autism spectrum, and you got this guy coming along saying, well, hey, he could be an alien. That could be what it is. And the intolerance to whole wheat, the sort of celiac thing, that's connected to a lot of autism's spectrum gut, it's called. So it's a connected thing. And it's and a lower temperature. They might have a temperature of 96.8 instead of 98.6 because their body is consumed less rapidly by metabolic forces. And they
And
have
he
a
says
knowing.
that's in the website.
Yep, and they're notable for their knowing gaze, mature outlook, and appealing, dynamic appearance. They're good-looking kids. They're good-looking
Wh-
and smart. Yeah.
And isn't this kind
Well,
of the
here I'm going to
Indigo
interject here,
Children thing as well?
oh, say again.
I said, isn't this kind of the Indigo Children thing
Yep,
as
it
well?
blends the indigo
It's
things.
very
But
much,
I'll
yeah.
also say that I have talked to a great number of abductees, people who I believe have had the contact experience, and and they'll say, oh, my son is in he graduated high school early, and now he's studying physics at and then they'll name some prestigious university. And I've heard that. I mean, that's obviously not every case, but I've heard it enough that it strikes me. This is purely anecdotal. Um, so, I take note of that. That to me is very interesting. Um, young folks with these experiences, or these experiences run in the family, and then they will go on to be, very intelligent. So, and also, I mean, one thing that certainly shows up is that abductees are certainly very, and this is also anecdotal, just from the research I've done, very empathic. They're very capable of taking on other people's emotions,
Hmm.
and I feel that's that other researchers have talked to me about that, and I've certainly noted it in my own research.
Yeah, he goes into some of that. He talks about it more as in sort of the psychic realm. But yeah, sort of that empathetic quality. It's just such a broad sort of diagnosis he has for somebody. I mean, for somebody who's who touts himself as a behavioral scientist. It's it's remarkably vague. Well, they're good-looking kids who are pretty smart, but they might be weird. And which is sort of the summation of some of this. And it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of children of people who've had these experiences, and people and just the parents who have these experiences. I mean, again, anecdotal and not something that we're able to generalize. But if you're just hypothetically raised by somebody who's had these experiences and has been mocked and ostracized by these experiences, one might make a special effort, even if it's not conscious, to raise your children to be as empathetic as they can be towards others. So it can be a chicken and the egg thing, and what's the effect of, do the experiences create these characteristics, or are people with these characteristics more likely to have these experiences? So it's a big thing, and just what strikes me about Boylan is he's just so sort of dopey and artless about how he discusses it. Whereas the story you're telling, Mike, about the people you've met and the characteristics they have, and you're very carefully qualifying it with it's anecdotal, we can't generalize. That's a very rational way to look at something like this. And then you've got Boylan.
Yeah.
But he, always very insistent that the aliens have no bad intentions toward us at all. We just need to shut up and accept their wisdom. It's and like a lot of the exopolitics and disclosure stuff, there's a lot of crossover and a lot of overlap with some of the old contactee stuff. If listeners can cast their minds back to the halcyon days of 2014 or whenever we first started talking about it, you had this story about friendly aliens who want the best for us, and by the way, the best for us are these specific ecological or philosophical or political goals that we have to do in order to survive as a species. And the exopolitics movement and the disclosure movement goes into those fields as well, only they talk about it in more technological terms. And people like Greer and Stephen Bassett and all of those folks, they will talk about the fact that if the government would only give up the alien technology that it has scavenged from these crashed saucers, we could fix all our environmental problems. We could become energy independent. We could eliminate war. We could do all these things. And I'm listening to them on radio shows and on YouTube, and it's the same thing people were saying in the 50s, which was kind of refreshing after the sort of grim and gritty 90s with dulcie bass alien vivisections or whatever was popular.
Okay.
Hey, I met Steven Greer. I have a funny story.
You want to why don't you tell that now?
I can tell it right now. Yeah. So I was at a UFO conference. This is going back, I think, I'm going to say 2012. And Steven Greer was one of the speakers. This was a conference in the IUFOC, the International UFO Congress. It's like a 5-day long conference at this kind of rather pleasant and nice hotel conference hall venue. And one of the speakers there was someone I wanted to talk to so badly, and he's got a ton of charisma and really charming guy, is Colin Andrews. And Colin Andrews had was speaking at this conference, so I sent him a letter ahead of time. I said, listen, I'm going to be at the conference too. I want to sit down with you and just have a conversation. And he said, great, let's do that. And so we met up, and I shook his hand. I said, let's. And so he said, points outside, and there's this lovely little, picnic area kind of thing, like a garden there in the back. And so we sit there, and he was actually quite good friends, or still is quite good friends with Greer. And this is something, as an aside, I've talked to a lot of folks who've been in the scene for a while, and they'll say, like, oh yeah, like I worked with Steven Greer back in the day, back in the early 90s, and he was a really dedicated guy, and he was really, he was really, a powerhouse character, really pushing hard and really doing good research. And then they all kind of imply that something happened, and then he changed, and the person he is now is not the person he was then. And so I don't know what that is, what that was, whether it was an ego boost. And the thing is, I'm very cautious. Like, I'm not into making fun of people behind their backs as like a UFO character in this field. No. And then the one caveat I have is that I will make fun of Steven Greer. So, um, but so yeah, he's a whatever. I'm not going to hurt his feelings. I think he's beyond that. So, um, but so I'm sitting there with Colin Andrews. We're outside. It's this lovely afternoon in Arizona, and I'm talking, and then all of a sudden I kind of go, ooh, and I get this little. I could just see this little blur, this little thing close to my mouth, and I inhaled something. And Colin Andrews is English, and he's the guy, a crop circle researcher, actually the guy who coined the term crop circle. And he said, I saw that go in. That was a mosquito. And and we talk for a little while longer, and then all of a sudden I watch Colin Andrews. He like looks over my shoulder behind me, and kind of his eyes perk up, and he goes, Steven. And he stands up, and Steven Greer like walks right up to us. And Colin goes, Steven, this is my friend Mike here. He's been telling some interesting stuff. And I look at him, and I am mute. I am perfectly mute. I am incapable of speech. Like literally, like the words will not come out. Like I have no capability of producing speech. And Colin was a friend of his for a while, and they, Seeker's obviously two old friends, and I'm standing there like incapable of talking, watching these two people, and also Stephen Greer had bodyguards right and left of him. With like full on flak jackets and guns and stuff like that. So
Wow.
yeah, and like mace and all kinds of like whatever the batons that and zappers and stuff. So, and they're talking about the completely dullest stuff, like I get the flight was long, I got to go in, check in at the hotel, and we'll get back together and talk. And so this conversation lasts 2 minutes or so, and then Stephen Greer walks away, and I go, and I watch a single mosquito shoot out of my mouth. And I can talk again. So I have no idea what to make of that, but it's the only time in my life it's happened. So the single mosquito struck me completely mute in the presence of Stephen Greer. I was like, I'm not the kind of person who would like say, like, wow, funny thing about that. I don't know. I wouldn't have made fun of him or anything to his face, but I just thought that was amazing. Oh, and at the conference, so he stood on stage. If you ever have a chance to see him, oh my God, it's an amazing stage performance. He like runs around. He's like super dynamic, and he halfway through the thing, he's a bodybuilder. So halfway through the thing, he takes his blazer off, and he's got this short sleeve shirt, and you can see him kind of like, like I'm doing the little pose here, like if I was standing in front of the mirror, kind of like, like look at my own arms. Oh, not bad. And and at some point he said something to the fact he's standing on and the crowd just is eating this up, and I'm just like, this is like this is a cult leader, like preaching to the audience, the converted audience. It was really amazing experience. It left me kind of saddened in many ways, but at one point in the thing he said, I was approached. I was approached by the majestic team. They're still in power. I was approached by them, and they asked me to join them, and they said they would give me $2 billion to join. And you know what I said? I can't swear, but it's a word that begins with F. And so the first word is F, and the next word is you. And so that's what he told the Majestic 12 team, and they were offering him $2 billion. So and everyone in the audience, yeah, you stick it to him, Steven. It was fantastically entertaining. And then at the end, just like my toes were curling in my shoes. But so yeah, that was I thought was I
awesome.
don't think the team Majestic 12. I mean, it would have been really funny to be the guys in the basement of the Pentagon, and like just kind of like, what's going on? Let's go talk to Stephen Greer. And then, so maybe they did, but I'm sure there was never going to be an exchange of $2 billion. So it just reminded me of Dr. Evil, like in that thing, like $100 billion.
And I've seen his talks, and he comes across like he's promoting an infomercial.
Exactly, yeah.
But he's extremely charismatic and well spoken.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, and I've also talked to other folks. They say like, so now that I don't doubt that a charismatic, like, there was one guy who's actually worked with him, and he said it on my interview with him. His name is Fred Burks. It's an amazing guy doing research into government, like mind control issues and stuff like that. Very thoughtful guy, very interesting guy. So Fred Burks, and I consider him very reputable, trustworthy guy as far as what he said. He said, I worked with Steven Greer for a while, and there's a power to, and he just said that egomaniac silverback gorilla. And with that, he is capable of getting a whole crew to be so focused and their intention so powerful that he said, we were getting results. We would go out and
Yeah.
we were getting results. And then he had a lot of video footage, right? So the video footage to me, right, okay, this is what I saw in the video footage. It would be the night vision stuff with the the green glowing video imagery, and there's the sky, and there would be a little dot, and sure enough it would like move, and it would zigzag in that kind of unnatural way that didn't mimic a helicopter or something like that. And he would say, now here's the mothership, it's coming in through a portal from another dimension, and you can see it powering up right now. To me, I saw a little dot, moving in the sky. So
Mhm.
I think that just drove me crazy that he would say it was a mothership coming in from another dimension from the, Zeta Reticuli, and it was powering up with its antimatter reactors or whatever. He was just adding so much to what was a little dot in the sky. And I was with another guy who'd done a lot of research and a lot of stuff with the night vision goggles and stuff like that. And he was a pretty level-headed guy. And he said, some of the footage he showed, that was pretty compelling. That was pretty interesting footage. And it's like, yeah, but it was just a little dot. That's all it
Yeah.
was. So, um,
What's interesting though is that he does seem to get results with that. I mean, you don't have to label it.
and I'll tell
Um,
you right now, I think anyone could get results. You could go out in the woods. You
yeah.
don't have to follow his protocol. You could go out and just
Yeah.
light a candle and like meditate for 10 minutes. I mean, I hear these stories all the time of people saying, the thing that I've mentioned before is, what I often hear. I'll say people say, oh, I saw this UFO. It was really powerful, a really amazing experience. And I was like, what were you thinking or doing right before that? And it's like, well, you know what we were doing? We were talking about we wanted to see a UFO.
Yep.
And that is not uncommon. So, I mean, just the mere, all you need to do is mention UFOs, and your likelihood of seeing a UFO goes up. I don't understand what the mechanism is or why, but it's a pattern I've seen.
And it's more evidence that this phenomena interfaces with consciousness. These aren't chance encounters.
Yes.
Yeah. Here, I'm
I
going to
agree
just
with
one
that.
more story about this. So here's like just the
Okay.
intention thing. I was camping with a friend of mine, and we're lying on our back looking up at the skies, right? So we're both of us side by side, and now I worked in advertising in the '80s, and I worked on the My Little Pony campaign.
Really?
I did,
Yeah.
yes.
That is awesome.
So one of the things.
So
So
you
the
were in
My
that
Little
whole
Pony
Hasbro
commercials.
machine, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was part. I knew. Yeah, I knew. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I was right there. So
Cool.
yeah, that's GI Joe and Transformers and My
Yeah.
Buddy, and so yeah, and so
Nice.
the My Little Pony, at the end of every commercial, they would have a little the what was it was they would say, the little girl would kiss the pony, and she would say, "I love you, My Little Pony."
Mm-hmm.
So we're laying in the back, and we're looking up, and there's this little thing. It looks like, we've been watching satellites, and those are pretty easy to track and pretty easy to understand. And you can kind of say, well, that's a satellite. And then all of a sudden we're like, what is that one? We're like, I don't know, maybe it's a UFO. And without any prompting, this is the kind of thing I would say, I said, I love you, my little UFO, in the little My Little Pony voice. And I tell you, this thing flashed with like enough to like when you get a flash photograph, enough to kind of burn your retina for a second.
Mm.
And
Wow.
it happened exactly in reaction to me saying the most cloying, ridiculous thing I could say. And this thing like flashed and and if this had been a Steven Greer video, he would have every right to show this because it was spectacular. And I'm sure on night vision it would have been would have like burned the lens out or something like that. But um I just thought it was so funny that that was my sense was, and both me and the other person I was with was like, man, what I said triggered this little dot. It was nothing. It was a tiny little dot in the sky. There was nothing there was no feature. It was a little dot in the nighttime sky. And it flashed upon saying, I love you, my little UFO.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so you don't need Steven Greer to have these experiences. Yeah.
No, but with Steven Greer, you get the privilege of paying thousands of dollars
Thousands of dollars. Yeah.
to do that, and yeah, and then you get to see
and then
his
signing
buff,
non-disclosure agreement too. Yeah. And seeing
Yeah.
his arms.
I guess my point was that it was he's pushing this extraterrestrial view, but I would think that more leans toward a more consciousness-based view if you're able to summon them into existence. I mean, the ET view, especially from what he's saying, is almost like they're just sitting by waiting for you.
They're
And,
in essence, they're out there waiting for us to like turn our little mojo on and just kind of think, or meditate. And they've got like, they're looking through the little view screen on their flying saucer, and they're like, "Ooh, look, someone's meditating down there in a field." So let's go get them. Let's go show ourselves.
You'd think
which may
aliens
be
would have
happening.
better stuff to do,
Yeah, right. So I looked up the tinfoil hat, and actually, and this is not surprising to me, the concept of a tinfoil hat for protection against interference of the mind was mentioned in a science fiction short story by Julian Huxley. The Tissue Culture King, first published in 1927, in which the protagonist discovers that caps of metal foil can block the effects of telepathy.
Whoa, 1927. Nice.
Yeah.
So it does not surprise me it started in fiction, though. So much stuff we see first in fiction, and then it manifests in reality in some way. I mean, granted, people manifested this into reality, but like in the UFO phenomenon, like the first time a car got its power cut happened in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wrote about, there was a teleplay by Richard Matheson based on a short story that he wrote in the 1950s. This teleplay from the 1970s was called The Stranger Within, where Barbara Eden, Jeannie from I Dream of Jeannie, is impregnated by an alien that abducts her. And it's the sort of, so she's pregnant and the husband has had a vasectomy. So there's all kinds of like sexual tension, like, what really happened. And there's so many weird things in this teleplay, which Richard Matheson wrote. The teleplay. It was from 1974, which is way before Bud Hopkins. Anyone had like tapped into this stuff. And then the actual written story was from 1953. And the teleplay matches pretty closely with the story. And they use hypnosis. And there's a scene where the doctor even says the RH factor in her blood has changed. That's impossible.
Wow.
It's remarkable. It's a quite a good and powerful tight little drama. And Eve Arden's actually great in it, because she's got that kind of halting voice anyway. And she just, as the thing progresses, she just gets more and more kind of lost in this mind control. Really great. So that we jumped back to the 70s. Sorry about that. So.
That's okay. And the thing about the tinfoil hat, again, it makes more sense as a consciousness-based phenomena, because if like environmental factors somehow affect our brains in a way that is making us susceptible to these experiences, perhaps putting a tinfoil cap on really does block some of these electromagnetic signals.
Yeah, or
I mean, that's as valid as any theory, so
yeah. Or there's a part of the brain, the part that either summons it or co-creates it, that part is sort of shut off because you're wearing the hat, so you're not expecting that stuff to happen.
Yeah.
So subconsciously you're turning it off.
Or I could just see the aliens like sort of starting to manifest into reality and like peering in the room and like, oh, he's got the tinfoil hat. Let's mess with him. Let's just back away. Shh. And so there might be that factor too.
Or maybe it's like, putting a necktie in the doorknob of your dorm room or something. It's like, oh, got the hat on. We better get out. Don't go in. He's busy, so.
The and the same thing, like you said, people will sometimes say Jesus repeatedly, but it seems like praying to anyone you believe in can sometimes affect this phenomena.
Sure, absolutely. Intention. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And so again, you're left with that, well, why would extraterrestrials care? And the someone who's very Christian will say, well, they're demonic, but then why would other religious beliefs also work?
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know what if other religious beliefs do, but I certainly. And then there's
I've heard people praying to their whatever they believe in having stopped this phenomena.
and I've heard people asking, simply like saying like, "Will you please stop?" You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
having results that way too. So.
And sometimes it doesn't work.
And
So
absolutely.
is
And then sometimes people like Dave Jacobs will say, that, they'll say, I said, like in the name of Jesus, I don't want this to happen. And then they'll put it, he says, here's my memory. Like the aliens manifested in my room. And I said, in the name of Jesus, I don't want this to happen. And then they left the room. And then under hypnosis, they say, in the name of Jesus, I want you to leave. And then the whole thing happens. They get taken aboard the craft, they get taken through the medical examination, they get put back in the bed, and then they leave. And that's the two bookends, the aliens
right.
arriving, the aliens leaving are there, and the stuff in the middle has been erased. So,
Hmm. And when we were talking earlier about Star Children and such, Jenny Randalls actually wrote a book called Star Children back in '94. I think this is.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
95. And the true story of alien offspring amongst us. And I have a lot of respect for Jenny Randalls as a researcher. She comes up with some seriously unique ideas. She coined the Oz factor. I mean, she's a very good researcher. And she has a list of like, are you a star child? And it says, do you have any unusual phobias, such as fears of certain colors or a reaction to a particular word? When out driving or walking, is there an area that will make you take a long detour to avoid, even if you are not conscious of why you're doing it? Let's see. Have you seen what you are pretty certain was a UFO on more than one occasion, and if so, how often?
well, I would say these are the same things that would quantify, abduction research. You could use every single one of those
Yeah,
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
yeah.
And if
Yeah.
it is a
Have you?
family lineage, and which it certainly seems to be the case, and depending on what researcher you talk to, that it runs in families, then a parent should, have children. I mean, whatever should that. So there's an assumption that the parents are having children who are also having these contact experiences. So, um,
And that list of characteristics sounds way more reasonable than Boylan's. I mean, it's,
Well, there's a few more here. Have you had a number of vivid dreams about aliens and UFOs? Do you
mm,
dream normally in color and recall at least two or three of the dreams every night? Have you ever had flying, floating, or lucid dreams? This one's weird. When you read the word Sobek Alp, do they create any unusual feelings? And
what?
what kind of feelings are they?
really, is that
Yeah,
really in there?
that
I'm
is
writing
number
so back
6.
out. How do you spell that?
SOBEC-ALP.
Okay, I'm looking at that word. I'm listening. I have no reaction at all to that word.
Yeah, neither do I.
I googled it. The first thing is that's the International Starseed Network.
Mm.
It's like somebody's asking on a message board for the star seeds. What does this mean? So yeah. You're supposed to read it backward. It's placebos backward. The word placebo backwards.
Very good.
Huh.
You know what?
Oh,
This is very
yeah.
interesting because that's what if you're doing I mean, that might be the red herring that's in there. So if someone says, yes, I
Yeah.
feel that word, then Jenny Randalls takes that and throws it in the wastebasket.
Yeah.
That could
That's
be.
clever.
Did you develop a sudden intense interest in the following: space, ecology, antiquity, psychic phenomena, the sea, mysticism, or fountains?
Fountains, really?
Yeah.
I
At
love
what
fountains.
age did you at what age did you have the earliest vivid memory that you can check for accuracy with other family members? As a child, did you ever experience or talk to your family about strange figures or odd light effects appearing in your bedroom? Between the ages of 3 and 10, did you ever believe that your wardrobe could move or even talk to you?
Who didn't?
So this we don't have wardrobes in America. We do have
Right.
closets, right? So
Yeah.
Right.
closet door. This is like shows up in a number of questionnaires. I went through this crazy phase where I was like collecting all the questionnaires from abduction researchers. I wanted to put them on a big spreadsheet. I never did, but that shows up a lot. Fear of closet doors.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's where the monsters are.
That's where the
Yeah.
monsters, and even in
It's
Monsters Inc., the
yeah.
movie, the Disney movie,
Yeah.
they have like the big giant, factory where the closet doors are all like rolling through on and then you can open the door and step through and then end up in a little kid's room, even though you're in this other realm. That's the
And
interdimensional doorway. Yeah.
and Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, all the
Yeah,
way back.
yeah.
It's sort of a common trope and sort of almost a cliche of monsters in the closet or under the bed, but taken in conjunction with all of these other things, it could be suggestive of something else. But I am just tickled to death at that placebo spelled backwards thing. That
I
is
was.
that is
Yeah.
Do you have an interest in or enjoy attempting poetry, creative writing, chess, logical puzzles, or art? And have you ever had periods in your life when more than half an hour at a time where some awareness of space and distance has disappeared and you cannot remember how or why?
Well, except for the placebo thing, I answer yes to all of them. Yeah.
And she asks, please feel free to submit your answers. Although I don't know if her address is still current since this was 1995, so 26 years ago.
Hey, did we announce that we're doing this on the Kenneth Arnold Day at the beginning?
No, but I made a note.
Okay.
Yes, we're recording this on Friday, June 24th, which is the anniversary of.
Kenneth Arnold's
Arnold's
sight of
sightings.
the 9 shiny things zipping over Mount Rainier in when he was flying, looking for a crashed military plane on the flanks of Mount Rainier.
Yep, 1947.
In 1947, yes, the dawn, considered like day one of the modern UFO era, because that was the very first media circus that erupted out from his sighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I mean, we're off the
Now we jumped
the,
way
the
back.
timeline here, but that's a good distinction. It wasn't the first sighting, it wasn't the first probable anomalous sky event, but it was the first one that was the media circus. And because even a couple days before you had Maury
Maury
Island,
Island, yeah.
and so and there wasn't nearly as much until eventually Arnold gets involved in that. But
And then a couple weeks after,
yeah.
you have Roswell.
Roswell, which if Arnold hadn't had his sighting, Roswell probably wouldn't have been a thing. But the saucers were in the consciousness.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot what I was just
Okay,
going
let me just add.
Go ahead.
Kenneth Arnold had a pet owl.
Nice.
So they can't say
I'd
that
just
about
like
many
to-
people. So yeah. So now we can go
I-
on.
I would just like to say we have never stuck to the timeline.
That's true. That is true.
We have a rough general idea and we bounce around from there. So now we're up to about 2000. And in 2000, Rick Strassmann released his work on the DMT, the spirit molecule.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's been 16 years since that book came out.
That's nuts.
I just read that a couple of years ago for the very first time, and it was a really, I liked it a lot. And it didn't so much mimic the UFO. The thing, so Rick Strassmann was giving people in controlled situations, controlled medical environment in a hospital, giving people DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. And they would trip heavily for just a very short amount of time, and then he would monitor them and ask them sort of questions. So like all kinds of things, blood pressure and heartbeat and all this stuff was timed out. And then their experiences, they would talk, and people would have these psychedelic experiences, some of which sounded a little bit like UFO contact experiences. So you have to kind of play with it. You have to kind of the data has to be a little elastic to make it fit. So but sure enough, some of them do have the flavor. But what was the weirdest thing that I just loved was the sort of the people would say, well, I went there, and then they would say, oh, we've been waiting for you, or like, how did
Yeah.
you get here? There was this palpable sense of not here in this reality, you are in their reality, and they had somehow invited you or been waiting for you. Yeah, I just loved that stuff.
And one of the things about DMT is that one of the features of one of the characteristics of it, if you accept people's reports at face value, which there's a lot of them to sort of sort through, but people who undertake this excursion, I guess, together, they will, connect with each other in this other realm, and then when they're out of it, they remember what happened. I mean, it's like that. It's a shared experience, in some cases, which is really interesting. And Strassmann's book, Strassmann's a medical doctor, I think.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what it does is it takes the whole DMT thing and it puts a much more clinical, rigorous set of investigations around it than we got, 5 years earlier with the very awesome Terence McKenna, and his books like The Archaic Revival, and his lectures and his radio show appearances, where he was talking about DMT and talking about the connection between DMT experiences and how it might connect to, you know, UFO type things, and it was really cool. But if you've ever listened to Terence McKenna, nobody would ever mistake him for, a scientist doing clinical research into these
Right.
things. He
He's a
was,
poet, yeah.
yeah, he's sort of a poet, experiencer, voyager on the psychedelic seas kind of guy. And then Strassmann comes along and he says, well, wait a minute, let's do some actual, science with this, and comes up with just, phenomenal stuff. So, and that's one of these things where, all of these, the DMT stuff and the consciousness stuff, you're starting to see more people talking about this in the especially in the 21st century, and with the emergence of the internet and the growth of paranormal radio programs, there are more venues for people like Rick Strassman to get some time and to talk about these things. And it's really sort of pushing beyond we're seeing physical beings in structured craft who have traveled from another planet as the sort of only way to look at these things. And it was a nice sort of going back to the days of a John Keel or something, where, let's explore numerous possible, origins for these things.
Yeah.
Agreed. And there's a
And
great documentary about it too.
yes, there is. And doesn't Joe Rogan host that as well?
I don't know if I have no idea.
I think it's Joe Rogan that hosts it. And I was wrong. It's 2001 the book came out. And he did his research from 1990 to 1995. And he's a clinical associate professor of psychology at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine.
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah, it's been a long time. I think I read the book when it came out, and that's the
Yeah, so did
only
I.
time I've read it. So I'd forgotten that he did his research in the early 90s. I was sort of, for some reason, I was thinking it was the late 90s, like right before he wrote the book. But yeah, so he was doing this sort of, contemporaneous with McKenna, sort of popularizing it which actually probably worked to Strassman's benefit, because everybody who was into this stuff knew about DMT from, listening to Terence McKenna, and then oh man, there's a book by a scientist about it, so now you got to check this out. So that's that timeline actually works really well.
And I'd like to say, if anyone's interested in hearing from Strassman, I had him on about a year ago now. We did two shows. We did one on the first book and one on his new book, which associates DMT visions with those of visions in like the Old Testament.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
his conclusion, in a way, and he's basically that he said, where there's an alternate reality. That was, in a way, his conclusion. He said this is evidence of some sort of he's
like a tuning.
Yeah, exactly. And then so very interesting.
And I mean that opens up a whole nother possibility of what's going on, because to me, I wonder, like, one of the things, as a thought experiment, what if the light we're seeing is an Earth light? It's generated by some weird magnetic field in the Earth. It's creating a light. We know these things exist. We've seen them in earthquake lights and stuff like that. And when we're in that same area, maybe it affects us in a way that releases a little extra DMT, because DMT is natural to the system. And once that happens, the light then becomes a structured craft. The light then interacts with us, and it may be that we're tuning into another dimension, and we're sort of creating that reality for a few minutes while the extra DMT is in our system.
I actually spoke with a shaman one time, this woman, and she said, just as plain as day, and I wish I'm going to do a poor version of paraphrasing her, that these high strangeness events that people will have, either shamans or UFO abductees, are like a little DMT release from the pineal gland. Like it's simply releasing
Hmm.
into your, and then you're having these high strangeness events, which are totally generated. The power and the importance of them are there, but they are not. They are generated. They're self-generated.
Yeah.
And
And
I'd
yeah,
never heard anyone say it so plainly like that. And it kind of was. It was like I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a nice way to frame it for me.
yeah, that's one of the things that I'm when I talk about shamanism in class, I talk about DMT, and I talk about, there are chemicals in these chemicals that people say, oh, it's a hallucinogen. It's the same chemical that our brain produces. And so some have argued, I don't tell my students this is absolute fact. I say some have argued that it's designed to sort of be, taking more of it our brain's designed to handle it. And in
Yeah.
some cases our brain can sort of, just like just like you said, sort of the experiences are real, but their origins are within us, in a chemical sense, not just in a consciousness sense.
Right. Right. And it may open us up to create that other
Hmm.
reality that allows us to connect to an intelligence we otherwise wouldn't be able to understand at any level.
Yeah,
If there's another intelligence behind it, it could just be us deep down.
exactly.
Um, so in 2001 as well, Strieber released The Key.
I love that book so much. I got that book as soon as it came out, and Whitley Strieber was kind of just he was talking about, this is interesting. He was talking about the production of that book. I can't remember the actual day of when he met who he calls the Master of the Key, and so he was talking about it on his website leading up to that. So I was hearing about it leading up to this, and then when I got that book, I had been reading a lot of channeled material at right at that time, and this just dovetailed so cleanly with this channeled material. It feels like you're reading a channeled book. It's just a question and
Hmm.
answer, back and forth dialogue. The story is Whitley Strieber is in a hotel room in Toronto. He is woken in the middle of the night and he thinks it's the like the busboy coming up um, to take his tray back from the room service. So he opens the door and this man zips into the room, and I can't remember how the dialogue started. Something like like, why are you here? And the Whitley Strieber asks, and he goes, because you are chained to the earth. And that's how this dialogue started. And it is, and and so supposedly Whitley Strieber kept a yellow legal pad and was taking notes as he did this, and then spent the next couple of years, and I think trying to recreate the dialogue, which seems impossible to me to try to
Yeah.
recreate a dialogue. And then said he was also doing a lot of meditation at the time, and he's a dedicated meditator, meditates for many hours every day. Actually, I don't know how many. He dedicates or meditates every day. But anyway, the book reads like a stage play. It's like two people having a conversation. And at the very end of it, the guy's this, very nice, soft-spoken, pleasant old man wearing a gray turtleneck and I think a dark gray blazer. Um, Says, "Oh, we here. Just why don't you drink this?" And he pulls out a little bottle, and Whitley Strieber says, "Okay," and drinks this weird liquid. And then the next thing he knows, he was waking up the next morning, which is right out. Where's Joshua Crutchin for this one?
Right,
Well, I was just
right.
gonna say,
Yeah. So it's like, like we got like, and and to me, it is. I actually, this is sort of speaking to where I was at the time in my life. I was reading all kinds of channel material, and for some reason I had the key always around. It was always like on the desk, and I'd read it a couple times, and it's a quick read. You can read it in an afternoon,
Oh,
thin little
yeah.
book. Um, and I would just like use it like a oracle deck, right? I would just like, okay, I'm just gonna, like, oh God, I'm all like filled with angst, and this was right at the point when I'm like realized that I may have had these UFO contact experiences, and I was very, very like I was reaching for any source to bring me some solace. And I would like I'll just use this like an oracle deck, and I open it anywhere and just read a passage. And I am not kidding. It was so powerful. It was always like it was like asking the master, right? Basically, like, okay,
Mhm.
like, oh, what do I need right in the moment? And the master would just like give you this little Zen koan that would be exactly perfect for the moment. Yeah, that book. The only way I can describe that book is that's the book that's going to get him into heaven, right? So when I mean that if he has done any grand deed on this earth, it is the publication of that book. I am thunderstruck by how remarkable that is. There are ideas in that book that I've never heard or touched on anywhere else.
One of the
And
Yep, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and I've never felt that way about the book. That was the one book he wrote that I was always kind of like, I don't know what to make of this.
Oh, it just touched me. It just touched me, man. It just zapped me right at my core. Yeah.
I give Whitley the benefit of the doubt. I believe he's telling the truth about what he experienced, but I also wonder if this is essentially a Men in Black encounter.
Yeah.
And how much of that information is true and how much of it is to throw us off.
Maybe, I mean, it's very interesting. I don't have a good answer to that. He talked a lot there's a lot of weather stuff going on in there where basically it's pretty gloom and doom in a lot of ways because this master of the key, this nice elderly gentleman who's delivering all this stuff, says, that you are setting yourself up on humanity is setting itself up. You've crossed the line. There's no turning back. The terrible weather patterns are going to get worse, and that was the genesis of a book that he wrote with Art Bell called "The Coming Global Superstorm,"
Yeah.
which was made into I think Michael Bay. Did Michael Bay make the movie?
Yep.
He might have.
Yeah.
I believe it
Day
was.
After Tomorrow. Yeah.
Yep. That movie was terrible. Oh my gosh. That
I
that
didn't think
was
it was that bad.
that was a bad movie. But one of the things about the key that always sort of, I mean, I'm I'm with you, Soraya. It really, I admired the craft of it, and I thought there were interesting bits, but it didn't really, you know, touch me until a few years ago. Whitley claimed that it had been monkeyed with, like a subsequent edition
Yes. Yeah.
had been jacked around, and that's a technical term, jacked around, in some way. And I remember I was mowing the lawn listening to the Dreamland episode where he was talking about this, and he talked about it in some typically Whitley Strieber-ish melodramatic terms. The sort of, overwrought Whitley Strieberism. Who I love Whitley Strieber. Sometimes he can get a little overwrought. And there was a couple years ago. I also read, I think it was a couple years ago, it might have been more recently than that, on Reality Sandwich, which I think is it's like Daniel Pinchbeck.
That's Daniel Pinchbeck. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a funny story about Daniel Pinchbeck. And Whitley
Um,
Strieber. Keep going.
there's a two-part, through a fractured glass darkly, like a two-part, not really expose, but a sort of critical, very very critical evaluation of Strieber by it wasn't by Pinchbeck, it was by I can't remember who it was by, but it does a really sort of close analysis of Strieber's claims about the key, about what happened to the key, and he sort of makes, I can't remember the details, but he makes the argument that actually the changes that Strieber claims undermined the key actually enhanced it and made it stronger. And it goes into a bunch of other stuff about the supposed sort of MK Ultra-ish stuff that Strieber has talked about, that he possibly dealt with as a child. It's really a good. It's critical of Strieber, but it isn't dismissive of him. Um, so it's Through a Fractured Glass Darkly, I believe is the name. So if you can find
Hmm.
that, it is a really interesting. No matter how much you love or otherwise Strieber, it's an interesting read, and it's, the guy. I think in the second part he actually reached out to Strieber and got some feedback about his criticisms and everything, and it's interesting. Strieber is,
Yeah,
no
the
matter
the
what
the
else
author
anybody says about him, yeah, he's an interesting guy.
Yeah, so
There was also
the fellow who wrote that essay is Jason Horsley.
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I interviewed him, and we talked a lot about Whitley Strieber in that interview when I was doing podcasts
I
with him
heard
going back
that.
a few years ago.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's really because he basically goes on and on. I was kind of picking him like, well, what's your take on Whitley Strieber? And he said something that was very, and he says it very clearly, and I'm paraphrasing from memory here, but he basically said Whitley has written some of the most beautiful, thought-provoking, and powerful stuff I have ever read. And then he writes this sort of pop fiction that is kind of trite, and you could just basically support Jason Horsley was like, why don't you write more of the beautiful stuff? Like he was hungry for more of that beautiful stuff, and he was, and I think that whole thing sort of grew out of that annoyance
Yeah.
where Strieber has written some, and I agree, some very powerful, beautiful stuff, and then at the same time he writes these pop adventure novels that are that have a UFO theme at times, and
Hmm.
but so yeah, that was the tension that Jason was addressing in there, and then he yeah, so that I just thought that was very interesting because he's obviously a fan and a very
Yeah.
sort of like, and then I think he, oh, I don't know, and I agree, like that, like it's like looking at a Zen koan in a way. That little excerpt, which I can't remember what it was, that was lifted out of the key in the first publication. I think it was just a few words, really,
Hmm.
and
yeah.
then those words were placed back in the second publication, which came out within the last 5 years or so, and it doesn't and I was like one of those things where I was like, I don't know, it's just a few words. It's kind of, you can read it any way you want. And that was my take on it. And Whitley had one take on it, and then Jason Horsley had this polar opposite take.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's also an article written called Michael Talbot in the Key, and it's authored by someone calling himself Clifton Strange. And he compares some of the stuff that the Master of the Key told him, and some of it almost word for word comes out of Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe.
And Whitley is new, and Whitley is like no stranger to Michael Talbot.
No, he was friends with
Yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah.
And he had an experience after Michael died, which he thinks was Michael coming back to him briefly. But I don't know that Whitley would have done this intentionally, and I think it's really interesting that there's so many connections there.
Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, is it yeah, this is where it gets very blurry, like what role does consciousness play? That book, so you can buy that book, you can hold it in your hand. It's a real thing. And there's power to it. That's interesting. But where did it come from? Did it come from a
Yeah.
man standing in there? Like if we had a video camera, and would Whitley have been sitting alone in the hotel room, or talking into space? I don't know. I mean, this is these I don't. It's very mysterious, and it's very powerful at the same time. The book itself. I mean, I'm obviously a bigger fan of the book than both you are, but I just that book just slays me.
I think the best way I can sort of think about it is for whatever reason, Whitley Strieber is at the center of just a maelstrom of bizarre phenomenon, and he's he's spent the last 30 years or so making sense of it the best way he can, and he's very honest about, I think very honest about the fact that his view of what these things are changes and develops as more experiences happen to him. And some people have said, well, he's inconsistent with this and that. It's like, no, I think he's groping around trying to figure out what has happened, what the meaning of these things are. And I think the key is an example of one of the ways he's attempting to work through these experiences in a way that's beneficial to others, as it clearly was to you, Mike.
Yeah.
I think he's, and I don't think this person's listening, but I owe an editor of a journal a review of The Supernatural, and with that I'm way overdue in getting written.
That was an
It was
excellent book.
it really was. I'm reviewing it for a journal of new and emerging Novo Religio, Journal of New and Emerging religions, religious movements, and things like that. And it's a great sort of book for scholars in that field, because I mean, I'm not sure it's a great book for scholars in the field because it's not a scholarly text. What it does is it takes the tools of the study of religious movements and applies it to the supernatural or the paranormal, and it does. Kreipel does a really good job of doing that, and just the alternating chapters between he and Whitley are just, it's really good. It's really good. I liked your interview with him too. That was a good interview you had with him.
I agree.
Oh,
That
yes, yeah, the
interview with
two-part,
Jeff
yeah.
Kreipel. Yeah. If people haven't listened to that, you have to listen to that. It's amazing. And I will point out that his book came out in February, and this is just something that I've actually written both Jeff and Whitley about, because all of us were like, hey, this is kind of weird. That yellow eye on the cover
Yep.
is an owl eye.
Yep.
And there's a bunch of owl stuff in there that we were writing independently. They did not know, I was, well, actually, that's not true. I guess I have corresponded with both of them. But just that, I'm going to be very cautious how I say this. The books have been, like when you go on Amazon, that says, if you bought this, people bought these, buy these two books together. And it's the owl book that I worked on, and then their book, which has an owl on the cover and lots of owl content in it. And in a strange way, maybe shouldn't even have said this. I'm really excited that those books are being bought side by side, because in a funny way, I was struggling to say some of the things that they were saying in that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think your book and their book are sort of natural companions. I think of somebody who was relatively new to the field, who picks up the supernatural because they've read Kreipel's other stuff, and it's like, oh well, I'm gonna look at this now, and then sees that people are also buying your book and picks that up. I think reading Supernatural and then reading your book will give them much more insight into what's going on in both books, I think. I think they go together very well.
Okay,
and
good. I didn't want to say that, but that was
no,
it's not just. I was like, oh my god, I sound like I'm tooting my own horn. I got to be careful.
They're a good match for each other.
And I do believe I had you guys on back to back, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you might.
You and then Kreipel.
And I love Jeff Kreipel. I mean, that book, Mutants and Mystics, is like, that book is one of my favorite books in the last, decade, by far.
So the Key came out in 2001. The redone version looks like it was 2011. And the coming global superstorm was actually 1999. So it was before the Key.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so the coming global superstorm came out, but that was okay. That's okay, but that was but he had been writing about the
environment. Well, the environmental thing has been through his UFO encounters the whole time.
So what we need to do is, which I would have to get a copy of the Key and hold it out. And when did that event take place? When did the fellow walk into his hotel room? So I would guess it would have been before the coming global superstorm, because he said that was the basis of that work he did with Art Bell.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. I don't know where it says in here when it happened. It doesn't seem to actually say. It just starts up with something was disturbing me, causing me to swim out of a deep sleep.
I think he would have been in his hotel room in Toronto, and he was on a publicity tour signing a book, and I can't remember what book it was that he was on a book signing tour.
All right. Yeah, I don't have time to sit here and read this while we talk, unfortunately. But now it is now December of 2000.
Huh. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm right. This is somehow they're related. The superstar.
Okay. Because it's possible what I read was just him saying that, he's writing the book in 2000.
Okay. According to Wikipedia, which is never wrong, he was visited in the pre-dawn hours of June 6th, 1998.
Okay. So that's perfect. So that means Mike is right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
and
then Superstorm came out in 99, which would be, inspired by that meeting in 98, and then he finally gets the Key written and published in 2001.
Wow, they made that movie fast. Yeah.
Yeah, it showed. It was terrible.
I didn't think it was that bad.
Oh, it's so funny. I worked
looked
on doing a lot of
great.
glacier stuff, like glacier rescue stuff, and
It was gorgeous.
that's right. It was kind of the dawn of like
Yeah, the sort of epic summer tentpole special effect extravaganza thing, sort of the wave after Armageddon and Deep Impact sort of thing. But I just hated the people in it. Like I couldn't
what was
get past
interesting?
how annoying I found the people.
I lived in New York City, and so I was very intimate with like all the locations and stuff like that. And there was the whatever set they did, where they had the New York Public Library filled with water, was so perfect. Yeah, because I spent a lot of time in the New York. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the New York Public Library, and I thought that was like, my God, they did a good job capturing what that place would look like, half filled with freezing cold water.
All right, that seems a good a place to end as any. Next week will be part 8 of this series. I'm thinking part 9 will probably be the final part. Part 8 is already recorded, so if you're a patron, you're going to get that right away.